What's new, crew? My name is Cassandra. Today we are down in the garden. This is the first year that I'm really growing onions. I grew some last year, however, didn't really take care of them properly, didn't really know what I was doing. So over the winter I did some research on onions and here we are. Now, what I'm doing today is technically pruning my onions. I just wanted to share with you guys a couple of things that I learned on how to keep onions, how to grow big onions, and just some random things that I found, I guess, while we are taking care of this. So how to prune an onion, let's start there. So these are our onions. How you know your onions are ready to be trimmed is the same way you kind of know how they're ready to be harvested. From what I understand, once these green onions fall over, it sends a signal to your onion saying, I'm done, we're gonna stop growing, I'm ready to be harvested. To keep your onions growing, you basically wanna cut these off before they fall over and hit the ground. Once they're down, it's done. The onion's done. Also, you know how big your onion is by how many green onions you have coming off of the neck here. The neck, some of these weeds out of the way for you, is just this part here that all of your green onions are going to start branching off of. So I have a bucket here, just a kid's Easter basket, and we're going to be saving these green onions. I'm going to chop them up and dehydrate them, and we will save them and use them later on. So nothing's going to go to waste here, but we're going to prune these off before they start falling, and they signal to these onions that they're ready to stop growing, because I want to leave these in the ground as long as possible to get the biggest onions that I can. So anything that is starting to droop over, I'm going to cut off and get those in the bucket. This one here is just kind of starting to flop. I'm gonna cut it. I just want to take some of the weight off of these bigger pieces so that my onion can keep growing. Like you can see this one here, it's topped over, it's soft. From everything that I've researched, this one's pretty much done. We could probably harvest this and call it done, but because I don't know 100% on what I'm doing just yet, I am just gonna trim these off and hope that maybe they just fell over, because my 1-year-old was in the garden with me earlier today and last night, and I'm hoping that she just kind of stepped on it or tromped on it a little bit and that it'll still bounce back. We're gonna hope, but we're gonna see how that goes. I am just gonna do this with all of these. I'm just gonna start taking the weight off of as much of these as I can. Evidently, there are actually world-class onion growers. I think a lot of us have seen like the world's biggest pumpkin or state fair qualifying pumpkins that you see people growing, like Atlantic pumpkins and things like that. Well, there are the same things for onions, and they're just like world-class onion growers. And some of those people will actually just take tomato cages and put them around their onions to help support the weight of these green onions here, so that they never touch the ground, they never flop over, and the onion just keeps growing and keeps growing. If you were going to do that, you wouldn't have to trim any of these off in theory. But this is something that we can do on small scales. Unlike big farmers that grow acres and acres of onions, you know, you have a couple square feet of onions, it's really easy to just kind of trim these off, and you'll be able to save these green onions. You can dehydrate them, freeze dry them, use them in your cooking however you want to do it. Use them fresh, of course, that's always an option, but hopefully this is going to help us grow larger onions, and we get to utilize the green onion, which is something that maybe we wouldn't be able to do if we didn't kind of give all of these a haircut. So it's something really simple and really easy that I'm going to do today, and hopefully it's going to pay off, allow these onions to stay in the ground as long as possible, and we'll get bigger onions. My plan is to do this a couple times throughout the growing season, just keep coming through and giving these a little bit of a haircut, and hopefully getting some really big onion harvest in the fall. So I guess we're just gonna have to stay tuned and see how these go, but that's kind of my garden project for today.
Once we get inside, we're just going to give these a really good rinse, pick out anything that we don't want in there. Sometimes because we have hay in the garden, we get pieces of hay or pieces of dirt. Sometimes you find bugs in here. Just doing what I can to pick out everything that I don't want. And I'm just gonna let these soak for a minute. I'm gonna drain the water, rinse them off again, and get these really nice and clean. Now, I'm just going to take my kitchen scissors here and start cutting these back into a clean bucket. I did smarten up here. This is the first time I've done this project. Eventually, I just grabbed my dehydrating trays and cut them right onto the dehydrating trays. This didn't take very long because I had a lot of helpers. We had a lot of green onions. So this was really great. We ended up keeping some fresh, but we're doing 2 preservation projects with these. So our first round, we are going to dice up or chop up however you want. I like to keep mine a little bit bigger because they are going to shrink in the dehydrator. I don't purchase dehydrator trays. They can be really expensive and sometimes they can be hard to find. I just use parchment paper and kind of cut the hole out in the middle so that the air can flow through. It still dehydrates really well. It doesn't add to the dehydrating time. That's just kind of my tip. So we ended up just cutting these up, getting them on the dehydrator trays, got them in the dehydrator. I ended up dehydrating these for about 8 hours at 125. They came out absolutely perfect. Like I said, I do like to keep mine a little bit thicker than I think I'm going to want because they will shrink down. Once those were done, we just put them in a mason jar and put my lid and my ring on and put them up on my shelf. I do not use an oxygen absorber. I don't use a vacuum sealer for these. I just put my ring and my lid on and call it good. You can definitely do either one or both of those things if you are looking for a more long-term storage, but we are going to use this within the year for sure, so I'm not worried about making sure that this is super shelf stable. It's going to last super long term. We do not have a freeze dryer. If I had a freeze dryer, I would freeze dry these instead. So that is always an option as well. For our second preservation project, I ended up putting our whole green onions on these trays. I'm going to be making an onion powder out of these. They taste just like onions. It's interchangeable. The only difference is this powder is going to be green and not that like traditional white color or that kind of like purpley red color that you would get if you made it out of red onions. We're just going to stack these on. Mine are a little damp. I've never had that be an issue going into my dehydrator. If you wanted to pat these off, dry these off, you definitely could. Some people would definitely recommend that. I say just throw them on there. If they're a little damp going in, it's never made a huge difference in the outcome of product for me personally. Once I got all my trays filled up, I put them back on the dehydrator, put them on my dehydrator at 125 for about 10 hours. These took a little bit longer because they were full whole pieces, but once again, turned out absolutely perfect. I know I'm going to get questions on it, so I'm using a Weston Gamekeepers dehydrator. These are very cost efficient from Walmart. These usually go on sale at the end of the year after hunting season around late November, December. They can drop to like $20, $15, and they are absolutely amazing. I've had mine for a couple of years now. I use it all the time. It's great. Once those were dried, I took them out of the dehydrator and put them in my food processor and just blended them until it was a fine powder like you would want an onion powder to be. Once again, put that in a mason jar and just added it to my shelf. No vacuum sealer, no oxygen absorber, just a lid and a ring, and added it to the shelf. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in another video.